Hey friends, Miss Dable here. I've decided that I am going to read a chapter book to you guys. Remember, chapter books don't have a lot of pictures, so you guys are going to have to visualize in your head while I read the story to you. I'm going to make sure I'm reading with lots of expression because remember how we read in our head isn't always the same as how we read out loud. The story I'm going to be reading for you guys is called Gooney Bird Greene. It's a really silly book, and she reminds me a lot of Junie B. Jones. You know Junie B. Jones, right? We read her stories a lot. So this book doesn't have a lot of pictures, so you guys are going to have to close your eyes and visualize if you want, or you can watch me read it, but my hair is messy and I got my Holcomb sweatshirt on, so I'm sure you guys are at home in your PJs too. So let's go ahead and get started. Gooney Bird Greene by Lois Lowry. Chapter 1. There was a new student in the Water Tower Elementary School. She arrived in October after the first month of school had already passed. She opened the second grade classroom door at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning and appeared there all alone. Not even a mother there to introduce her. She was wearing pajamas and cowboy boots and holding a dictionary and a lunchbox. Let me see. Visualize in your head. What color do you think she was wearing? What color pajamas? Hello, Miss Pigeon, the second grade teacher said. We're in the middle of our spelling lesson. Good, said the girl in pajamas. I brought my dictionary. Where's my desk? Who are you? Miss Pigeon asked politely. I'm your new student. My name is Gooney Bird Greene. That's green with a silent E at the end. And I just moved here from China. I want the desk right in the middle of the room because I like to be right in the middle of everything. The class stared at this new girl with admiration. Can you say that word, admiration? Admiration means they looked at her like, oh, wow, like she's so cool. I wonder if I can get to know her. They had never met anybody like Gooney Bird Greene. She was a good student. She sat down at the desk Miss Pigeon provided, right in the middle of everything, and began doing second grade spelling. She did all her work neatly and quickly, and she followed all the directions. But soon it was clear that Gooney Bird was mysterious and interesting. Her clothes were very unusual. Her hairstyle was unusual. Even her lunches were unusual. At lunchtime on Wednesday, her first day in the school, she opened up her lunchbox and brought out sushi and a pair of bright green chopsticks. Touch your head if you ever had sushi. I love sushi. It's got fish and rice, and sometimes it has vegetables. So yummy. On Thursday, her second day at Water Tower Elementary School, Gooney Bird Greene was wearing a pink ballet tutu over green stretchy pants. She had three small red grapes, an avocado, and an oatmeal cookie for lunch. On Thursday afternoon, after lunch, Mrs. Pigeon stood in front of the class with a piece of chalk in her hand. Today, she said, we are going to continue talking about stories. Yay! The second grader said in a very loud voice, all but Felicia Ann, who never spoke. And Malcolm, who wasn't paying attention. He was usually under his desk. Gooney Bird, you weren't here for the first month of school, but our class has been learning all about what makes good stories, haven't we? Miss Pigeon said, and everyone nodded, except for Malcolm, who was under his desk doing something with scissors. Class, she said, what does a story need most of all? Who remembers? Miss Pigeon had her chalk hand up in the air, ready to write something on the board. The children were silent, and they were thinking, what makes a good story? Finally, Chelsea raised her hand. Chelsea, what does a good story need? A book? Chelsea said. Miss Pigeon put her chalk down. There are many stories that don't need a book, she said pleasantly, aren't there? If your grandma tells you a story about when she was little, she doesn't have that story in a book, does she? Kind of like right now, I'm telling you a story, and you don't have the book right in front of you, but you're listening to it, right? The class stared at her, all but Malcolm, who was still under his desk, and Felicia Ann, who always looked at the floor and never raised her hand and never spoke. Beanie said, "My grandma lives in Boston." Kiko said, "My grandma lives in Honolulu." Ben said, "My grandma lives in Harrisonburg, Pennsylvania." Tricia shouted, "My grandma's very rich." "Class, class!" "Shh," said Miss Pigeon. Then, in a quieter voice, she explained, "Another time we will talk about our families. But right now—" She stopped and looked at Barry Tuckerman. Barry Tuckerman was on his knees in his seat, and his hand was waving in the air as hard as it could wave. "Yes, Barry," said Miss Pigeon. "Do you have something that you need to say? Something that cannot possibly wait?" Barry nodded his head. His hand waved. "And what's so important?" Barry stood up beside his desk. Barry Tuckerman liked to make very important speeches, and they always require that he stand up. "My grandma," said Barry Tuckerman, "once she went to jail. She was 20 years old, and she went to jail." Then Barry sat down. "Thank you, Barry. Now look what I'm writing on the board. Who could read this word?" Everyone but Malcolm and Felicia Ann watched as she began to write a long word, and they all shouted it out. "Beginning!" "Good," said Mrs. Pigeon. "Now I'm sure you all know this one. Friends, I bet you know this one. What comes after the beginning?" "The middle," the children shouted. "Good. And can everyone guess what comes after the end?" Beginning, middle, and end. "Correct," said Mrs. Pigeon. "Good for you, second graders. Those are the parts a story needs, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now I'm going to write another very long word on the board. Let's see what good readers you are." She wrote a C. She wrote an H. "Miss Pigeon," someone called. She wrote an A and an R. "Miss Pigeon!" Several children were calling. She turned to see what was so important. Malcolm was standing beside his desk and he was crying. "Malcolm needs to go to the nurse, Miss Pigeon," Beanie said. Miss Pigeon went to Malcolm and knelt beside him. "What's the trouble, Malcolm?" she asked. But he couldn't stop crying. I know," Nicholas said. Nicholas always knew everything. His desk was right beside Malcolm. "Tell me, Nicholas, remember when Kiko showed us how to make origami stars?" All of the second graders reached into their desks and their pockets and turned out their lunch boxes. There were tiny stars everywhere. Kiko had showed them all how to make origami stars out of small strips of paper. The stars were easy to make. The school janitor had complained that last Friday he was sweeping up hundreds of origami stars. "Malcolm put one in his nose," Nicholas said, "and now he can't get it out." "Is that right, Malcolm?" said Miss Pigeon. Malcolm nodded and he wiped his eyes. "Don't sniff, Malcolm. Do not sniff. That's an order." She took his hand and she walked him out of the classroom. She turned to class and said, "Children, I'm going to be gone for exactly 1 minute and 30 seconds while I walk Malcolm to the nurse's office. Stay in your seats while I'm gone and think about the word character. A character is what a story needs." Who is a character in this story so far that you can think of? Who is a character in this story so far that you can think of? When I come back from the nurse's office, we're going to make a story together, and you must choose who your main character would be. Talk amongst yourselves and think about an interesting character, like Abraham Lincoln, or Christopher Columbus, or Babe Ruth, said Ben. "Yes, Babe Ruth is a possibility. I'll be right back." Mrs. Pigeon left the classroom with Malcolm. When she returned 1 minute and 30 seconds later without Malcolm, the class was waiting. They had been whispering, all but Felicia Ann, who never whispered. "Have you chosen?" she asked. The class nodded. All of their hands went up, except for Felicia, because she always looked at the floor. "Who is your choice for your main character of your story?" All of the children shouted together, "Who do you think? Who do you think is going to be their main character?" "Gooney Bird Greene!" they called. "Miss Pigeon." "Class," she said, "there are many kinds of stories. There are imaginary stories like Dumbo, or—" "Please raise your hand if you want to speak," Miss Pigeon said. "Yes, but you are correct. Dumbo is an imaginary character. There are also stories about real people from history, like Christopher Columbus." She stopped, and Barry Tuckerman was waving his hand again. "Yes, Barry, do you have something to say?" Barry Tuckerman stood up. He twisted the bottom of his shirt around and around. "I forgot," he said. "Well, then sit back down, Barry. Now, class, since Christopher Columbus's birthday is coming up, I thought—" She looked up at Barry Tuckerman, who was waving his hand like a windmill in the back of the room. "Yes, Barry," she said. Barry Tuckerman stood up. "We all know about the stories about Christopher Columbus," he said. "We want to hear a true story about Gooney Bird Greene." "Yes, Gooney Bird Greene," the class called. Miss Pigeon sighed again. "I'm afraid I don't know many facts about Gooney Bird Greene," she said. "I do know a lot about Christopher Columbus." "We want Gooney Bird Greene," the class said. "Gooney Bird," Miss Pigeon said, "how do you feel about this?" Gooney Bird Greene stood up from beside her desk in the middle of the room. "Can I tell the story?" she said. "Can I be right in the middle of everything? Can I be the hero?" "Well, since you want to be the main character, I guess that would put you in the middle of everything. That would make you the hero." "Good," said Gooney Bird Greene. "I will tell you an absolutely true story about me." And that is the end of chapter 1. Let's see, this story has 7 chapters. So I will post 7 different videos of me reading this story to you. I hope you guys like the first chapter. This book is really silly and really interesting. And you can listen to me read the first chapter as many times as you want. I'll see you guys soon.